All right, welcome to another episode of Sales Pipeline Radio. I'm your host, Matt Heinz. So excited to have you here as we round out May and head into June already. For those of you that are joining live on LinkedIn or YouTube, thank you very much for making us part of your day, part of your business day, your week. If you're joining us live, you can be part of the show. If you have a question, a comment, a rebuttal, a rant about our topic today, feel free to throw that in. We can reference that. We can bring your comment up on screen, make you part of the show, and thank you as always for doing that. If you're listening or watching on demand, thank you for downloading and subscribing. Over 260,000 downloads now for Sales Pipeline Radio. And if you want to access any of this content, current, past, and future, you can always find it at salespipelineradio.com. Super excited to have today our guest. He is former CMO and now Chief Evangelist for Gong, Udi Ledergor. Udi, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I'm excited to be here.
I feel like there's so many things we could talk about, but I mean, so much of it is in this book, Courageous Marketing, that you published a month ago.
I got my copy.
We've all got a copy. I mean, hopefully, if you don't have a copy, go get a copy of this right now.
I've got a few behind me. You might be able to see.
I'm sure you. Well, you do have a few. We got a whole row there. Not surprising. I'll tell you what. There's a lot of books that I need to read in my job that are nonfiction. But this is one that was just a joy to read because of the topic, because of the approach that you took on it. And I think I would argue that this could be part of your beach reading list for summer 2025. There's a lot of business books I would not say take to the beach, right? Because it is not beach reading. I think this is one, and I'm not just saying that. But Udi, you've been marketing leadership, investor advisor for a long time. Why this book? Why this topic?
Matt, for the last 20 years, I've been doing B2B marketing. And in the last 9 years, I've been doing that at Gong. For the first almost 7 years, I was CMO at Gong, and I kept going on podcasts, not as wonderful as yours, but others. I've been speaking at conferences, and I've been sharing how we did things to succeed as well as we've been doing at Gong. And lots of people told me, Udi, you've got to write a book. It's so practical. It's so pragmatic. You just tell people tactically what they need to do. And I used to joke, when would I ever get time to write a book? And then 2 years ago, I transitioned into my current role as chief evangelist. And suddenly I had the time to sit down and write a book. So I decided while it's all fresh and I'm still in touch with all the people who made the magic happen, I'm going to sit down and write a book. And that's what I did in the last 18 months. And then last month, the book came out, Courageous Marketing, became an instant bestseller in half a dozen categories on Amazon, which is super exciting. And thousands of people are already reading it on the beach, while mowing the lawn, on vacation, on business trips. It's designed to be read on a coast-to-coast call, so on coast-to-coast flight. So between San Francisco and New York, it only takes 4.5 hours to read. You can finish this on any short flight.
Unless you're flying into Newark, you might read it. You might finish it before you even take off.
Before you even take off.
Yeah. So there's a couple angles of this book I want to be able to talk about for folks. First is sort of the marketing playbook component, and the second is the career success component. I feel like it's becoming a harder and harder time to be a marketer and a more and more exciting time to be a marketer as the field is flooded with information, flooded with noise, harder and harder to break through, but I think more exciting, more fun, more fulfilling to be in a role to sort of build and earn that attention. What have you learned in your career and in your time at Gong that sort of feeds into the playbook that marketers need to follow today?
Right. So I love how you divided the two main topics. The first 2/3 of the books are things that people who've been following me and Gong would expect to find there. So I talk about timeless lessons in building brand, in building content, in creating a product category, or in creating magical event experiences, all these things and more. And people are telling me that when they're reading the book that they think that these things are so important to reiterate now when people are using and abusing AI for things that it's good for, but also for things that it should not be used for, like having a sharp point of view on something. AI can't do that yet because it's only averaging the things that are already out there. So if your content is not landing and you're using AI to create tons of it, maybe that's why, because AI cannot come with that sharp point of view yet. So that's kind of the first part of the book. And then the second part is things that I haven't talked about a lot publicly, but I thought would be an amazing opportunity to put them down in the book. And I honestly co-wrote a lot of those chapters with not only my former team members, folks like Devin Reed and Chris Orlov, Vince Chan, Sheena Badani, and many others. But also I interviewed other CMOs and sales leaders like Ryan Longfield, who's now at Shopify and was the longtime CRO at Gong. We practically co-wrote the chapter on how sales and marketing should align together. And I think those lessons are timeless because they talk about the human side of marketing and how to navigate your career from finding the right company, identifying whether your CEO is going to give you the flexibility and wiggle room that you need to be creative in marketing, how to build a courageous team that do their best work while working with you, and how to work with sales to produce the business outcomes that your company needs.
So much to unpack there. Talking today on Sales Pipeline Radio with Udi Ledergor. He's the chief evangelist at Gong, author of the amazing book, Courageous Marketing. Excuse me. So many marketers are fixated on clicks and likes, focused on impressions and form fills. You talk a lot about experiences. Experiences isn't always something you can immediately track. It isn't something that you necessarily always have on a dashboard, but I think it's becoming more and more important in the marketing playbook, in the go-to-market playbook today. Why do you think experiences are so important?
Experiences are a phenomenal way of creating a memory link between what your brand stands for and being valuable. And so how does this work? By now, I assume most of our listeners and viewers have heard about the 95-5 rule, which suggests that only about 5% of your audience are in market. You can argue about the number. It could be 7% or 9% in your market. Nobody cares. It's a small percentage of market. Otherwise, everybody would be buying everything from you now, and
right,
you'd have no pipeline for next quarter. But that's not the case, right? So most marketers would agree there's only a small percentage of my market right now in market. But how do I create and nurture a relationship with them so that when the 95% not currently in market do move into the buying zone, it could be in 6 months, could be in 12 months, could be in 24 months. How do I make sure I'm the first name that they think of? And the way to do that is to create memory links that connect what you stand for with what they might need in the future and keep that relationship going until they're finally in the buying zone. Now, experiences are an amazing way of doing that. Standing out and being valuable when others are trying to just hard sell all the time is an amazing way of doing that. And so here are 3 very tactical tips to how to create those experiments and relationships and experiences in a way that builds those memory links. So I'd say number 1, preemptively budget your marketing experiences and experiments. And here's how I always do this with my CFO and CEO. I say, look, there's 2 things you need to know. 1, whatever's working for us in creating pipeline and demand gen right now is going to stop working at a certain point. I don't know if that's next week or next quarter or next year, but everything that's working now is going to stop working. We need to constantly be experimenting with new things that we're not doing yet. Some of them are going to be duds. Some of them are going to look promising. We need to budget for that. So they say, okay, that makes sense. What's the second thing? I say, here's the second thing. We're usually doing the budgeting exercise, say in October, November, preparing for next year's budget. But here's the thing. There's going to be opportunities that present themselves in the middle of next year that we'll want to do, but I don't know about them now because they haven't been announced yet. This could be a big event that happens next October that might only be announced in April. If we don't put aside some budget for these things now, I'm never going to be able to capitalize and monetize on those opportunities. So that's the second reason why we need to preemptively budget for these marketing experience. And even the most data-driven, cynical CFO or CEO will see the light in those 2 arguments. So that's one really practical tip. The second one is different is better than better. You don't want to play the game that everyone is playing by trying to outspend them, because as a startup, you can't do that. All you can hope to do is be different. And by being different, you're already leading in your own space. Gong did that when we looked at hundreds of B2B websites back in 2018 or 2019, when we wanted to roll out our first visual identity. And back then, everyone was using the same palette of what one of my team members called the Series A blues. And they pair beautifully with whites and grays, but that's what everyone was using. So Gong decided not to find a better blue than everyone was using, but to go in a completely different direction. And we chose fuchsia pink and purple and a drooling bulldog as a mascot. And guess what? That earned us a lot of attention with very little budget. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is really to provide continuous and consistent value in your content marketing, in your event experiences, in your thought leadership, in your swag, in everything that you're doing to create those memory links so that in 18 months, when John Smith is finally moving from the no buy zone to the buy zone, Acme Inc. or whatever your company is the first name that he thinks of when he's ready to buy.
I love that you've kind of differentiated sort of budgeting for courageous marketing and creating a culture for courageous marketing. I will never forget years ago working with a company that told me that internally there was something that they knew of as reputation capital. And what that meant, what that literally meant, was you don't want to be associated with a project that fails. Think about that. Think about what that does to innovation. Think about what that does to courage. Think about what that does to letting anybody try something that is not by the book. And you can imagine how well that company did over time. But
that's such a terrible idea.
Well, of course it is, right? But like it's not. But not everyone understands it sort of inherently, like this culture of courage or this like I've been said in the past, like culture of failure. Like accepting and encouraging failure as part of the process, that is not a common thing. How do you create a culture and a team that accepts and rewards courage in that format?
Right. So let's talk about that, because I think it's one of the most important and one of my favorite chapters of the book, I'll be honest, is how to create a courageous team that does their best work. And this was a discovery process for me in hindsight. When I interviewed half a dozen of my team members and saw all these themes and stories bubbling up, they finally formed a picture and a framework that I could not have put into words earlier. So let's say two things about this. One, exactly what you said. If you create a culture where people are afraid to take risks, if they never want to be associated with failure, you're creating a culture where everyone is always playing it safe. And guess what? When everyone's playing it safe, you're never going to drive innovation. You're not going to do anything creative. You're never going to stand out. You're just going to play it safe and follow those dreaded best practices, which in reality are boring practices, because by the time anything becomes a best practice, everyone is doing it. So you are guaranteed at best the ordinary results that everyone else is getting. You're never going to create anything extraordinary. So if we all agree that to create something extraordinary, which is what most of us say we want to do, we also have to do extraordinary things. And that means risk failure and actually promote it and encourage it. So that's one thing. The second thing is, okay, so how do you actually do this? How do you create this culture? And here's a really overly simplified version of it. There's lots more in the book, and not only in my book. I would highly recommend Adam Grant's book, Think Again, to anyone who wants to learn more about creating this culture. He wrote about winning teams at NASA and other great organizations and how they created this culture. But here are the two main points from that chapter. What you want to create is psychological safety, where your team members feel safe to fail. They know that if they drive an experiment and take risks and things inevitably will not always work out, they will not be fired for doing that. They will be celebrated for the learning, for the initiative, for the risk taking. And it's that culture of psychological safety that allows people to come out of their shell and go beyond the best practices and do amazing things. Now, theoretically, that could lead to people going rogue and doing experiments for the sake of experiments and not always tied to the business goals. So you do have to counterbalance that with something else that Adam Grant calls process accountability. In the simplest of terms, the way I could describe this is everyone needs to be rowing towards the same North Star. So if we know that we have a certain amount of pipeline to create this quarter, that is the goal. And we're going to create a process accountability around achieving that goal. But within everyone's realm, in social media and in events and in content, everyone can do whatever they need to and use whatever means and take risks and drive experiments to get to that goal. And that's where the psychological safety meets the process accountability. If you can create those two things working in harmony, you would be amazed at what your team can do.
So important and just so easier said than done, and so rare, I think, in organizations today. I think last topic I want to cover with you, we've talked about courageous marketing. We've talked about courageous teams. Let's talk about courageous careers, because this book was written as a playbook for how to do better marketing, but I love that it really covers this as a function of career success. For people listening, whether they're beginning of their careers, mid-career, wherever they're at, what does a courageous career mean? And what are some things people can do to sort of lean into that concept a little more?
I think courageous career means that you lean into your strength and you focus on them. And this is, again, a counterintuitive, I think, mistake or false assumption lots of people have, which are, oh, I've got to work on my weaknesses because maybe I'm a super creative person, but I don't know enough about data. So I'm going to take all these data courses and try and get better at that. I'm not saying don't do that, but you're probably never going to be the best data person if you're already inherently weak at that. But if you continue to sharpen your creativity skills, which you're passionate about and you're already good at, and everyone's telling you what a creative person you are, that's where you can actually shine. Yeah. And so not accepting that you have to change dramatically to succeed, but actually taking what you're good at and finding an opportunity to let those skills shine, sharpen them, and use them in everywhere you can. That's one way of creating a courageous career. Now, I talk in the book about two paths of getting there. One of them is correctly choosing the company, the CEO, and the role where they will let you shine. And I have frameworks for how to do that, and how to check the culture on Glassdoor, and how to check the product market fit on G2, and how to ask your friends who might be using the product or potential users of the product to find a lot of the pitfalls. Because here's one very common one, Matt. When every marketer I know has stepped into a company without product market fit and ended up having to leave the company pegged as a failure when it was not even her fault, because the company had no way of succeeding because they don't have product market fit. But of course, marketing gets blamed for that because you didn't create pipeline and you didn't create sales, and nobody knows about us. Of course, nobody knows about us. Like, we don't have a single happy customer who's getting value from the customer. I can't scale that.
Right.
But so that's one path. And then the second one that I talk about extensively in the book is how to create your own roles. So you might not do this from your very first role, but once you get into an organization and see where your skills are most helpful, not only did I build my career that way, but a bunch of other people I spoke to, like Trisha Gilman and Carrie Lou Dietrich and other great stars in the CMO world, they built and charted their own path based on what they were passionate about and where they saw a problem that they were excited to solve. And they built the whole role around that. And, you know, at my humble example, I've stepped into product management roles, and then marketing leadership roles, and now evangelism roles that I created all of them from scratch. And I never stepped into someone else's role and continued what they were doing. I always was excited about a problem that I saw. I wanted to solve it, and I created a role around it. Even while I was working at a company and I saw a domain that was being neglected, I made the business case for, we need someone to solve that, working on that full time. And once the CEO said, yeah, Udi, you're right, then I said, well, I've got the perfect guy for you. Here's how I want to transition from my current role and how I'm going to do that without dropping any balls. And I want to move on and solve that problem. And so that's another great way of building your own career that, from my personal experience, can come with a lot of satisfaction and gratitude, because you're really working on the most exciting things and you're using your favorite skills to do that.
Well, I'll tell you that the passion, optimism, and energy you've heard over the last 18 minutes with Udi is in this book. I highly encourage you to check this out. It really is a very quick read. It's a very fun read. I think you'll learn a lot from it. Udi, thank you again so much for joining us on Sales Pipeline Radio today. Thank
you so much for having me, Matt. And I'd love to hear the listeners' take on the book.
Yeah, would love. Hey, throw those into the comments. We'll make sure Udi sees those. If you like the book, give it a good review on Amazon as well. That certainly helps spread the word to more marketers. Have a great weekend. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week on Sales Pipeline Radio. Take care.